Good morning. On behalf of our Chancellor, Dr. Elwood Robinson, and our administrators, faculty, staff, and students at Winston-Salem State University, I welcome you to the Enterprise Conference and Event Center at the Simon Green Atkins CDC development. We thank the North Carolina Department of Public Safety for selecting this venue to host this forum in accordance with Governor Cooper's Executive Order number 145, focused on equity in criminal justice. Since Winston-Salem State University's inception in 1892, our institution has served as an epicenter to galvanize individuals and organizations around the ideas that improve our society, particularly issues focused on social justice, equity, and inclusion. For that reason, I truly believe that you are here today not by happenstance, but by providence. Winston-Salem State is the ideal location to delve into discourse about societal inequities, structural racism, and criminal justice reform. We know that today's conversation is necessary from a historical perspective. In 1861, Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens delivered what historians now refer to as the Cornerstone Speech in Savannah, Georgia. Stephens stated the following, and I quote, "Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite ideas of those of slavery foes. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth," end quote. It is from this very philosophy that systemic and structural racism emerged and continues to perpetuate itself in our American society. You will find this philosophy deeply rooted in our education system, our banking industry, our criminal justice system, and other structures where power dynamics are at the core of their operation. It is for this very reason that today's conversation is necessary. But my challenge to each of us is that these discussions continue well beyond today in an ongoing, inclusive manner, where listening and empathy are more important than talking. Additionally, it is imperative that actions result from these conversations, but these actions must challenge the status quo. These actions must evolve beyond reformation and aspire to achieve transformation. Reformation is simply changing language and affixing it onto a system that was designed by a consciousness of bias and racism. Transformation requires a complete reimagining of a system, transcending and breaking away from its existing core philosophy, which is often grounded in oppressive beliefs. For 128 years, Winston-Salem State University has challenged society to achieve transformation, not reformation. That is why your presence on our campus today in the great city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, is not happenstance. It is indeed providence. Once again, we welcome you, and we look forward to a wonderful conversation this morning that we know will result in collaborative, inclusive, transformative action for the state of North Carolina. Welcome again to Winston-Salem State University. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Eric Hooks, Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Public Safety. Mr. Hooks.
Thank you, Mr. Provost. It's indeed an honor to be with you, and thank you for your inspiring and encouraging words, because we indeed seek transformation. Good morning. I'm extremely encouraged and grateful for the participation in this important community forum. I'm especially pleased we're having this forum at this historic university. Winston-Salem State. Thank you to our provost once again, our chancellor, and to Chief Henry for hosting us today and bringing us together. We welcome our online viewers that are participating as we move through this forum today. In June of this year, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 145, which established a North Carolina task force for racial equity in criminal justice, which is chaired by Attorney General Josh Stein and Associate Justice Anita Earls. I, in turn, volunteered to chair the working group on policing policy and practice. The executive order moved DPS forward with creating a paid internship program with a special emphasis on HBCUs to recruit a workforce reflective of the entire community. I'm proud to say that we have in our first paid group of interns an outstanding young lady from Winston-Salem State University. The executive order also tasked the Department of Public Safety to host a forum, a singular forum, for interaction between law enforcement communities and people of color to promote positive relationships and work together for a safer North Carolina. I'm proud to say that we're doing 2 of these forums this year, the first of which is today at Winston-Salem State University, the second of which will be at Fayetteville State University later in the month. I recognize that there's a great deal of pain in our communities, in our state, and across our nation. The pain did not begin in Minneapolis with the tragic and unnecessary death of Mr. Floyd. The pain has been long-standing, and communities across our nation must be reconciled to the realities that we face. But through this pain, America must examine the disparities and the divides, and while we also must promote healing and reconciliation. The journey that we are on is very personal to me because I've experienced that pain in my own life experiences. When it comes to race, I agonize on the many times society has prejudged people who look like me. However, I do recognize that we all can be guilty of not living up to one of God's great commandments, to love one another as we love ourselves. I do want to say that despite the troubles and the tribulations that we face and the historic pressures that are upon us, I believe that law enforcement and public safety remains a high and noble calling. And with that, I also maintain that the highest ethical standards should govern every aspect of law enforcement, and true justice demands treatment that is equal for all racial and ethnic groups. Those of us who are truly committed to professional public safety must continue to uphold the sacred trust placed in us by our communities, and which is confirmed by the oath that we take. Our mission in DPS is accomplished through effective law enforcement, emergency response, homeland security preparedness, and other public safety measures. However, I continue to acknowledge that we do very little alone. We must have the trust of all communities. I'm a firm believer that public safety officials must constantly strive to not only navigate communities, but take the necessary steps to be a part of all communities, to engage and maximize the opportunities to bring together diverse talents for the benefit of those communities. We are building and maintaining intentional partnerships. We must stay engaged with our critical stakeholders, and that's why I'm extremely grateful for the collaboration that this forum will bring to us today. We have a fantastic panel who will lend their considered perspectives on racial equity and community partnerships. I'm grateful to our faith-based leaders, our community leaders, and our higher education leaders who are joining our law enforcement leaders today. I will now turn the forum over to our moderator, Pamela Walker, who is the Director of Communications for the Department of Public Safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good morning. Thank you all for attending the forum today. We appreciate you being here. I do have to tell you a little bit about some technical issues that we've been dealing with. We're having technical issues live streaming, and so we hope to either get it up on live stream soon or we will record it. We're definitely recording this whole forum, and we will post it as soon as possible when the forum is completed. If anyone is watching and some of their colleagues or friends are reaching out to them and saying, I can't see it on YouTube, please let them know to log into the event. The information is on ncdps.gov. That's ncdps.gov. Hopefully people will be able to find it. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce our panelists. And they are in alphabetical order, starting up front with Mr. Herrera. Mr. Herrera is with the Hispanic League of Winston-Salem. He is a board member, and he's retired law enforcement. He retired from law enforcement in 2012. While originally from Nassau County, New York, he has been in North Carolina for 8 years. He is active in his community as a board member for the Hispanic League of Winston-Salem. Herrera serves on the Education Committee overseeing the Middle School Achievers Program that mentors bilingual at-risk youth. They work to persuade youth to stay in school and seek a higher education. Previously, he served on the board of Strong Youth, which STRONG stands for Struggling to Reunite Our New Generation, a grassroots organization that mentors at-risk youth and gang members to leave that life and become productive members of society. He's held many positions in law enforcement and a volunteer firefighter. He was head of the investigations committee, worked on a street crime unit, vice, narcotics, and investigators unit, gang task force, gang intelligence, mental health unit, and he has also been a hostage negotiator. Next, in the middle here, is Chief Deputy Rocky Joyner. He is with the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department. Chief Deputy Rocky Joyner began his career in 1988 working patrol for the Kernersville Police Department before joining the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office in 1992. Throughout his career, he has been assigned to various areas within the agency to include being a school resource officer, patrol criminal investigations, civil and support services, and administration. He worked at the Kernersville Police Department in 2010, where he worked as a patrol officer and worked through the ranks to sergeant and retired in February 2018 as sergeant in the Special Operations Division. He came out of retirement and was sworn in as Major of Enforcement in December 2018 with the Sheriff's Office. He has also overseen the Enforcement Bureau, Detention Bureau, Administration, and as second in command at the Sheriff's Office, he assists the Sheriff in planning, administering, and coordinating the activities of the Sheriff's Office. He holds many certificates and degrees. Next is Colonel Glenn McNeil, our commander of the State Highway Patrol. Governor Cooper appointed Colonel Glenn McNeil as commander of the Highway Patrol in February of 2017. A military veteran, McNeil began his service as a state trooper in 1994. During his law enforcement career, he has served in various positions, including the Special Operations Section as the troop commander, and upon his promotion to major in 2014 as director of training. With oversight of the State Highway Patrol Training Academy, McNeil was responsible for all aspects of training from basic law enforcement to telecommunicator schools, in-service training, radar and training for civilian support personnel, as well as supervisors. A native of Reidsville, not too far from here, McNeil holds an associate's degree from Durham Technical Community College, a bachelor's degree from Mount Olive College, and a graduate certificate from the University of Virginia. He also is a graduate of Administrative Officers Management Program and the National Academy at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Quantico. He's a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police and NC Police Executives Association. And to my right, Dr. Nation with Winston-Salem State University. Dr. Nation is the chair and associate professor of justice studies in the Department of History, Politics, and Social Justice at Winston-Salem State University. She has a bachelor's degree in criminology, from the University of Maryland, a master's in applied sociology from Old Dominion University, and a doctorate in criminal justice from the University of Cincinnati. With almost 2 decades teaching in higher education, her research focuses on policing, juvenile justice, issues around minorities in criminal justice system, specifically race, class, and gender. Her book, Citizens' Preferences About Police Work, An Argument for Racial Variations, explored citizens' attitudes toward and expectations of the police. She has received several grants and in 2019 received the North Carolina Criminal Justice Association Founders Research Award for her research on criminal justice issues in North Carolina. In addition to receiving several teaching awards, Nation is published in a number of peer-reviewed journals as well as in several criminology and criminal justice encyclopedias. And in the middle here is Pastor Jason Sloan, St. Peter's Church and World Outreach Center here in Winston-Salem. Pastor Jason Sloan serves as the youth pastor of 24/7, a youthful extension of St. Peter's Church and World Outreach Center. Their mission is reaching, teaching, and preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to young people across all races, denominations, and cultures. 24/7 is a dynamic ministry comprised of young people. It is described as a ministry for youth who have given their lives in dedication to serving God, studying His Word, and praying fervently for the salvation of lost souls. The ministry is named after Jeremiah 24/7. Pastor Sloan is a recent graduate of Winston-Salem State University, so you're right at home, sir, with an interdisciplinary studies degree and concentration in psychology. He has also joined an elite group of leaders within the Winston-Salem community by becoming alumni to Leadership Winston-Salem. His wife, Mia, is also a youth pastor. They are parents of 3 children. And lastly, but not leastly, Chief Katrina A. Thompson, Winston-Salem Police Department. Katrina Thompson is the 15th Chief of Police for the city of Winston-Salem. She is a native of Detroit, Michigan, where she graduated from Wayne State University with a bachelor's in criminal justice. Additionally, she also holds a master's degree in public administration from Appalachian State University. During her 26 years with the Winston-Salem Police Department, Thompson has served as the Assistant Chief in charge of the Investigative Services Bureau, which is the command bureau over detectives and school resource officers. She graduated from Leadership Winston-Salem, class of 2016, 2017 Public Executive Leadership Academy of the School of Government at UNC Chapel Hill, the West Point Leadership Program of Methodist University, and the FBI Law Enforcement Executive Leadership Association. She is married to Alonzo Thompson, who also happens to be a former Assistant Chief of Police with the Winston-Salem Police Department and current Police Chief for Spartanburg Police Department. They have 2 children. And Chief Thompson, I'm going to start with you. If you will tell us why this forum was important to you to be a part of, and what do you hope that we will achieve out of this forum today?
Dr. Elwood Robinson and Winston-Salem State for having us here this morning, and also for Governor Cooper and realizing the importance of having such a forum. And so I believe that this is necessary and important as we have seen in our nation unrest around the country. We also realize that there have been a lot of social issues that have gone unaddressed. And when those social issues go unaddressed, they become criminal issues. As law enforcement, it is our responsibility, our duty to protect and to serve. And so here in Winston-Salem, we believe that it is important that we understand that when someone is in our custody, they're also in our care. And it is our responsibility to take care of them regardless of why they're in custody. So it is my hope that during this forum we can get some clear understanding in terms of expectations of not just my agency, but other agencies across the country, and that we can start the conversation here in North Carolina and move forward across our country in having fair and equitable attitudes and laws and policies around how we handle and how we care for individuals that we have in our custody.
Great, thank you. And next I'll go to Mr. Herrera. Same question.
Thank you. I also want to thank Governor Cooper's office and Winston-Salem State University for hosting this. What I want to see is we come out of here with a plan, with action. I've always been a grassroots kind of guy. I like to be boots on the ground, out in the field, and actually trying to make a difference. I consider myself an Indian. I say, to me, this is more of a chief thing, so it's kind of, for me to accept this, I like being behind the scenes and working out in the street. But I want to come out of here and not only bring the community together and have law enforcement understand the diverse communities that we have out there, being a Latino, being the black community, but in general, of all the different cultures that we have out there and how everybody's expectation is different, but also for the community to understand that law enforcement has a very hard job and a very dangerous job that they have to do. I think there has to be a mutual understanding and respect among the two, and that's what I like to see to come out from today's forum, is we have a plan to move forward and put it to work.
Okay, all right. Chief Deputy, would you like to go next, please?
I'm Chief Deputy Rocky Joyner with Forsyth County Sheriff's Department, and again, I want to thank Winston-Salem State for hosting this, North Carolina Department of Public Safety for bringing it here, and the governor for having the insight to say that it needs to expand further in our state. We've been having a lot of community forums like this here in Winston-Salem with our partners, Winston-Salem Police Department, and we've been doing a lot of talking. It seems like we've met and talked a lot, but we, as he says, we hadn't really got a clear plan of action, and so what I hope to bring when we all come together is an understanding what everybody needs to do to move forward. Talking about it is great, but sooner or later we need to start putting our words to the ground and start actually doing what we're talking about and putting it out in our community, because as everybody here knows, the United States is hurting, and we just have to identify what the problem is and make sure we diagnose the correct problem so we know how to treat it. And I hope these community forums help us diagnose exactly what needs to be addressed so that we know how to address it.
Okay. Pastor Sloan, would you like to go next?
Oh, awesome. So first of all, I want to say thank you to, of course, Governor Cooper and his executive order, as well, Chancellor Robinson for hosting this, and just all of you for being here. I'm excited to be here. I want to say that, definitely I'm really concerned about our community. I'm really concerned about the impact of not just what we're seeing now, but the impact that has happened for decades. I was actually on another panel discussion that was hosted by a 12-year-old, and I'm concerned that even younger students than he, as well as older students, are really concerned about what's happening right now. So I think I'm here as to be a voice for those that don't have a voice, that probably deserve to be in this room. They may not be able to articulate themselves as well. They may not dress the part, but I'm here for them. I'm here for those that need to be in this room and need to be speaking up for themselves. And so that's why I'm here today. And I hope that we will leave here with some actionable ideas and thoughts. We'll focus on some KPIs, some key performance indicators that we can really target, and then move with a launchable plan that we can execute to definitely bring some closeness to our community and restore that relationship of the officer friendlies again to those young people that are really concerned about what's happening.
Okay,
Thank you.
Dr. Nation.
Hi. Yes, so I'd like to continue that line of thought, thanking Governor Cooper for identifying that this is an important issue that we need to really take a look at and put some time and effort in. And also like to thank you, the North Carolina Department of Public Safety for holding the forum here at Winston-Salem State University. I think this is an important discussion to have. The policy implications coming out of this discussion, I think would be immense for especially the communities around Winston-Salem State University. These are people who haven't been given a voice. I think another important issue that has been lacking in collaborations and partnerships is the lack of partnerships with the higher institutions within the state of North Carolina. As a researcher, I think research is very imperative in what we do and how we approach these problems. And we have not incorporated enough of the stakeholders who have the specialty to help the police department to look at the importance of how we really garner the community and get the community involved and get the community to change their attitudes and input more trust in the police force. So I think that is an important point that we should really focus on. How do we get data in this? How do we get researchers to partner with the police force and other stakeholders to really have effective programs and implement effective policies?
Thank you. And Colonel McNeil.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. It's an honor and privilege to be here today. I, too, also thank Governor Cooper for his outstanding leadership and foresight for us having a forum such as this, an opportunity to come together and to have an honest conversation. I'm also most grateful to the outstanding leadership that Secretary Eric Hooks provided to us in the Department of Public Safety, and for his vision to have us come together and to exchange ideas. I am most thankful to God that I have the opportunity to stand before this panel and our viewing audience representing the men and women of the North Carolina State Highway Patrol. We are in the business of being about public safety and of service. And any time that we have the opportunity to come together as an important forum and to hear from the communities, it helps us to provide better service to the citizens of North Carolina. So I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve with these outstanding panelists and to have an honest and open conversation to help my organization and the men and women of our state patrol be better. And so I look forward to having this conversation. Thank you.
So to give everyone watching a better idea of how things are going to flow, the first part of the forum will be discussion between our panelists, and I will pose some questions to the panelists, and we will have that discussion. A little bit later, at approximately 11 a.m., we will open up and take information or questions or comments from the public, those that have logged in as participants in the forum. So that's how we're going to start and how things are going to work today. We will take a break at approximately 11 a.m. to just let everybody know, and that will be a brief break. But before we get down that road, that far, I'm going to start with the first question for the panel. We're here today to talk about building partnerships that help make our communities safer. But clearly, there has been a lack of trust between communities of color and law enforcement. It's been reported in the news media, it's on social media, we all know it, it's present. What measures work best to build or rebuild that trust and promote a collaborative relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve? I'll pose that question to you first, Pastor Sloan.
Well, first of all, I think that historically, and I can only come from a personal perspective, as a child, when I was in elementary school, the officers would come in and I would meet Officer Friendly, I would do coloring books, and I saw somebody completely different than when I would go home to my community. I was raised in the inner city, in the projects, therefore, we saw them in a different, and I get it. However, I think that we're living in a time wherein social media speaks much faster than any of us, whether it be the clergy, whether it be community, and I think that what we have seen is a lot of somewhat injustice. In a sense, we've seen some inadequacies in a sense of how things are happening. So therefore, this is going to be long-term work. It definitely will be. It's not going to be anything. It's not going to be a quick fix. I think that we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I believe that we need everybody at the table. Not just those that understand dictum, not just them that understand the law, but we also need those there. I'm actually about to implement a government one-on-one school as soon as we come out of this pandemic for middle school students, so that they're understanding policies, that they understand laws, that they understand how to change these things. Because a lot of the things that we need to change, I think, are already based in law. And so I think we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm excited about that. And I think that going forward, it's a lot of work, and I have hope that we can fix it. I have not lost hope in this scenario, and working in a community, as Herrera said, I think that we have to be beacons of hope, because there are some young people that are beginning to lose that hope, and when they lose that hope, they develop their own levels of how to handle things in their own communities.
Mr. Herrera, you have a unique perspective. You're retired law enforcement. Now you're a big advocate in the community. What would you say to that question?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, sir. So clearly there's a lack of trust between some communities of color and law enforcement. What measures work best to build or rebuild that trust and promote a collaborative relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve?
Yes. When I joined the police department, law enforcement, there was a lot of respect for the job. And that came from home. My parents always taught me to respect law enforcement from the time I was a child. If I ever came home in the back of a police car, my father would have beat me and asked questions later. It didn't matter what the reason was. I was in a police car. I must have done something bad. We're growing up in different times, and I think the respect has been lost, and we need to get that respect back in the law enforcement's perspective. But also, I think the community needs to understand the job that they're doing out there, and on the law enforcement side, we have to understand the community. And let me think of the words to say. It's very, everybody's different in the way they act. And I think law enforcement, we start getting a little bit of tunnel vision, because you work in areas where you're dealing with bad people all the time. You're dealing with the worst of the worst. So sometimes you start thinking that everybody acts this way. I had law enforcement officers that I work with that would ask me, I was Salvadorian. Is every Salvadorian a gang member? Because MS-13 was so prevalent, and that's what we were dealing with on the streets. And I had to explain to them, no, the majority of Salvadorians are hard-working people. They come to this country to make a better life for themselves and to provide for their children, and I had to explain that to them. And I think that's where we've lost a lot, is that we don't understand where some people come from, and what they went through to get to where they are, to get to this country and work, at least in my perspective as a Latino. But even in other communities, our communities are so diverse, we act differently when we're among law enforcement officers. My people were louder. We like to party, and you know, they don't understand that sometimes the police are coming to do their job, and we get upset, but they're just doing their job. I go back to the way in my country, you know, I went to visit as a child a lot of times, and the law enforcement was different over there. Everybody was on the tape. Everything, you know, so the people that come from our country looking for law enforcement over here, they get pulled over. They're like, okay, how much is this going to cost me? Because that's the way it was back home, you know. So we need to, like I said, have a more understanding of our communities, and then a more understanding of what the police department does out in our communities.
Colonel McNeil, would you like to add to that conversation?
Yes, ma'am, I would. For me personally, it's about building bridges with the communities. If there is a disconnect as far as, you know, for my agency, one of the things that I look forward to always participating in community forums such as this is that it gives me an opportunity to introduce your viewing audience to the North Carolina State Highway Patrol. You know, we have various rules and policies and laws that we have to abide by as we deliver a very important but also a very dangerous and deadly service to the public. Over our 91 years of existence as a law enforcement agency, we've lost 67 North Carolina State Troopers in the performance of their official duties. So we do a very dangerous job. But how do we work towards sharing our policies, sharing our training with the public? This gives my agency an opportunity to do that. Transparency for me would have to be number one. The public, they have to know how it is that we're going to respond, how we're going to treat them when they're in our care and in our custody, what our rules of engagement are, and forums such as this gives us an opportunity to do that. So building relationships, being as transparent as we possibly can, and see how we can interact with the public to introduce them to who we are, and because we're in the public safety realm. You know, if we're providing them poor service, we need to know about it so we can work towards correcting it. And I think all throughout the country, that's what we're hearing. We're hearing people say, we're not pleased with law enforcement and the way they've been treating us, and we need to listen to them and be better for it. And I think this forum gives us an opportunity to work towards those common goals.
Okay. All right. This next one has a few questions, so I'm more than happy to repeat them. I'm going to give this first one to this question to Chief Thompson. Please describe how your agency has taken steps to foster positive relationships between law enforcement and communities. And what are some of the barriers, and maybe you can talk about how you try to eliminate them.
Thank you. So since 1989, our police department has been a community-oriented policing agency. Our then police chief, George Sweat, in my opinion, was a visionary leader who moved our organization from traditional policing to community policing. And what that is about is us building relationships as part of our daily duties. So it's the only way that we know how to deliver law enforcement services. So what that means for us is, yes, we answer 911 calls for service. Yes, we initiate traffic stops in an effort to kind of keep our motoring public safe. But what's most important is the service piece to protect and serve. And that is having the community events, our trunk or treat that we're preparing for now. And despite COVID, we're able to provide that to our children who have suffered so much during this time this year, still provide a glimmer of hope and light and happiness for them by doing a drive-through trunk or treat. That's an initiative that came from one of our police officers within the organization who understands what community-oriented policing means, and created an opportunity for us to have an interactive relationship with our children in non-enforcement, non-contentious times on a level that they can relate to during a certain time of the year. So we also have our community trust talks, and that is an opportunity for us to, we work in collaboration with the City of Winston-Salem's Human Relations Department, and this is an opportunity for us to in a safe space, create an opportunity to have open dialogue about experiences, basically your conceptions about law enforcement or law enforcement's conceptions about citizens. And so during that, it's either clergy trust talks or collegiate trust talks. We have trust talks with our immigrant population here in our community. We also have just a community at large trust talks, and that's, again, we're sitting down and we're having these open and honest conversations, again, during non-enforcement, non-contentious times, where we get to share our history and maturation so that people understand, and it's not just our citizens trying to understand law enforcement, but it's also law enforcement understanding why certain citizens, why certain residents don't care for law enforcement. And so it's having those open dialogues and explaining the experiences that we've had during our past interaction, and sometimes it's not even sharing our own experiences, it's sharing those experiences of our family members, grandparents. You know, growing up, my grandparents told me many stories about negative interactions that they had with law enforcement. And so through community-oriented policing, we are provided the opportunity to build relationships, to build trust and legitimacy, but also to create the opportunity to help us learn and grow, help us understand what it is our community actually needs from us, and what it is we can do better, but also what it is we're doing wrong. And so I think it's important when we're sitting down to have those discussions that we also understand we may have to agree to disagree, and that's okay, because there are certain things that we are taught as law enforcement officers that the public just won't understand, and we truly can't expect them to understand. But we have to, it is our obligation to explain it to them if they have questions about it, but we may have to walk away agreeing to disagree. And so I think it's, I think it's important for us to understand that we're all people. Regardless of what our profession, we're all people. And I think in our world, the word love has been a taboo. And I think as fellow human beings, we should love each other. And that's one thing, respect each other. And as Mr. Herrera was saying, having a basic understanding that we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different ideologies, but that's what makes us great. And to work together to understand those things. So for us, it's important to have the different initiatives. You know, prior to COVID, we had High Five Fridays. Again, that was another opportunity for the Winston-Salem Police Department, and that's just not just our sworn officers, but our civilian employees too, to deploy out to the different schools on Fridays. And as our kids are getting off the bus, we're high-fiving them and telling them to have a good day, enjoy your weekend, study hard, we believe in you. Positive interactions during non-enforcement, non-contentious times, so our children's perception of police is not us coming in and arresting a family member or a friend, but that they're having a positive interaction with us on a daily basis, and for that to be normal for them. Not the scenes that they see with George Floyd on social media, not the scenes that they're seeing from Hollywood on the movies, but to have true interaction with police. It's important for us, as we're having conversations with our community, to make sure our community have a police officer that they know they can call if they have a question about something, if they have some concerns about something. And so making ourselves available being involved, being active. That's why for me it's important for my staff to be members of our local boards or civic groups, or because that gives us another opportunity for our people in our community to get to know me as Katrina. Yes, I'm chief of police, but the most important role that I have is I'm Allison and Christopher's mother. That's who I am. And so I think it's important for people to know that we are people. I live in this community, so I have a vested interest in the health and safety and well-being of this community. And so I think if we are intentional as law enforcement agencies, but also as community members, about being engaged, about respecting each other, trying to understand each other, and loving each other for being people, that I think that, and agreeing to disagree, that we can move the needle in a positive direction on this.
Thank you. Chief Deputy, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I agree with her. It's all about getting out into the community. Like the pastor said, growing up, what he saw was the police coming in, doing their job, and leaving, and not until he got into the schools that he met officer friendly. And traditionally, that's what our role is. We come in, we do our job. They're holding the call. We make our arrest, take the call, move on to the next call. We don't have that time to be officer friendly. And so one of the things that we've done is we've created a community outreach division so that they don't always see that officer. We have to reach them at that young age, because that's key. That's when their slate is getting written. If we try to write on their slate in high school and even at a middle school level, their slate has already had a lot of writing on it that it's hard to erase. And so as an agency, we try, it's not by accident that we adopted North Hills Elementary School, because that's where a lot of at-risk youth go. And so we go out there so that they can see us, not in a traditional law enforcement way. We sit down with them, we read. It's supposed to be like an hour reading session. We read maybe 15 minutes, and the rest of the time it's just interaction, answering their questions. I mean, you'd be amazed at some of the questions that these first, second graders have that are adult questions, that stuff that they shouldn't even be dealing with, and real fears and real emotions that they're having that they just don't get to be kids. And so what we try to do is reach them as early as we can. We partner with the schools. We're in the high schools. We're in the middle schools. Yes, there's issues in the middle schools and high schools, but that's not police issues. To me, if we could expand our police coverage into the elementary schools, where the officers aren't just answering calls or breaking up fights or dealing with unruly students or having to deal with police issues such as weapons on campus or drugs on campus, to where we could actually sit down with the children and hear how they're feeling, hear how their life's going, give them a hug if they need a hug, and let them see that it's the man in uniform is not something to be afraid of. And so I think that that more outreach is the key to reaching small children and trying to write on their slate before they get too old and get set in their head that the police are always there just to do a hard job. And it's very hard on the patrol level to do that, to find the time to do it. The stuff you see from minute to minute affects you, so when you go to a call where you have the opportunity to maybe reach down and talk to a young person, you just left something that was so horrific that it's just not, it don't cross your mind. And so a part of what I think we as agents can do is we put a group together, so whenever an officer has a traumatic event, we sort of hover around them to try to let them talk it out and stuff, so maybe they can let go of it a little bit and not take it from call to call and go to the next call, back themselves, and not someone who's experienced a lot of emotional pain and then portrays themselves as being something other than what they are.
Colonel McNeil, I know that the Highway Patrol has a lot of programs, similarities, but you also have, it's just like throughout the patrol, there's this desire to be part of the community and work with the youth and do different things. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yes, ma'am. Well, first of all, I would just say I second the chief's comments. I second your chief, your comments as well. You know, we all come from the communities. You know, all of our state troopers, they are deacons, pastors, part-time school teachers, coaches, mentors. We encourage and we promote our state troopers to be very active in their respective communities because we're from the communities. I'd just like to add, we have something called a traffic information specialist. We have these positions, they're spread throughout the state. They're proactive, they're in the high schools. They go and do traffic safety conversations and safety presentations all throughout our state. You know, it's just the things that you think are important are the things that your folks are going to do. You know, we do something called school safety checks. Last year we completed over 19,000 of them. And the purpose of these school safety checks are to go to the schools, to partner with the school systems, and to also reach our youth. We're not there in an official capacity, although we're in uniform. We're showing up just to try to partner and just to demonstrate that, you know, we're committed to this school environment. And that's just one example. But, you know, as a leader for our organization, we have a command staff that we just push and we push and we push community involvement down through our masses. And, you know, the things that we document and we reward are the things that our folks are going to go out and do. I'll also just mention to add a step further than what the question that you asked me is this. You know, in our profession, we have to be as creative as we possibly can be to open up as many avenues as we possibly can to receive feedback from the public. We need to take the time and just slow down and explain to them, you know, when they receive a citation or they are arrested. You know, we view it one way, they're going to view it a completely separate way. But just opening up avenues, you know, we have numerous because we are accredited, and the two agencies that are here represented, I know they are also accredited as well. A part of being accredited means you have to give and provide numerous opportunities for the public to be able to provide feedback to us, whether it's calling our internal affairs to report an incident on one of our troopers or police officers or deputies, commenting on a state trooper through our DPS public safety website, you know, walking up to any state trooper and be able to file a complaint on a trooper or anyone in law enforcement. And I'm just saying we need to just expand how we can grow our interactions with the public and to be able to receive feedback from the public. It's not always negative. I would say easily 60, 70% of the comments that we get from the public, they're positive. So just looking at how we can be more creative and having feedback, receiving greater feedback from the public is something that I would encourage, and hopefully we'll receive that from a forum such as this.
Dr. Nation?
Yes, so I just want to say most agencies are not like Winston-Salem State or Forsyth County. So we have to be honest to say that most agencies in North Carolina, across the country, are not implementing these different partnerships and the tenets of what community policing is all about. So we have to, you know, point to the fact that there is a lot of work to be done across the state, across the country, because most police officers who work in communities don't know the communities, don't know the people. They have assumptions about these people based on their race, based on their class, right? And so, so we also need to keep that in mind, that most chiefs are just not like Chief Thompson, okay?
Thank you. Anyone else want to add?
May I add just a comment to that? What I'm thankful for that here in North Carolina, we have strong leadership like Governor Cooper. We have outstanding leadership like Secretary Hooks, that we collaborate with our law enforcement partners all throughout the state. Today is not my first time interacting with Chief Thompson. We send text messages to encourage one another throughout. And so here in North Carolina, I respect and I receive what you said, and I also agree with what you said. But it starts at the top, and it starts with Governor Cooper, the things that he sets as a priority for our agency and for Mr. Secretary, and we believe in having outstanding partnerships with both of the chiefs associations here, with the sheriffs associations, and we collaborate. There is much work to be done, and I appreciate that, but I can tell you, it starts with the top. All of our chiefs, it starts with state leaders. We got to have these open and honest conversations on how we can be better, and thank you for your feedback.
Okay, and that's the important thing here, where we're talking about this panel and this task force is looking at concrete policies. We're looking at how we do overall change in what's going on, because that is what is needed, okay? And so we have flagship police departments across the state that we can, I don't even say train, and just more mentor folks in other chiefs. You know, when folks talk about training, I'm always skeptical about training. My mentor, Ed Latessa, said it's really should be more about mentoring. You train people, then you come back 2 weeks, then you come back a month, and you keep in contact with those folks and understand that they're implementing whatever it is that they received in that training. So these things are important, but I just want us to really focus on what is it that, these are the big problems. How are we gonna really achieve, the goals that the task force have set out, okay?
I would also speak to that really quick in the sense of, for Winston-Salem, particularly in this particular ward, Southeast Ward, I was concerned in the sense of investment, right? When the bonds came out, it was interesting that in our communities, it's going to be more policing. It's going to be more police cars, more police precincts, when there's millions of other things that we can use with those dollars to do. And as well, even in North Carolina, looking at the Wilmington situation, I was glad that the new chief dealt with that immediately. But that sends a signal to me as a part of the community that that's available and that's there. I think our police and all of our law enforcement do an amazing job in the sense of connecting with the community. However, there's still that sits in that same system. And so we're not terrified. When I heard Chief Katrina at a protest say that she has a child that has special needs, I was like, whoa. And see, I've met with her before, so I understand that. But the reality is my community doesn't have that reality. And so when they see her, they see them. And then it's reality for the blue lives not to call out one another. That's a problem for me. When I see that they have to kind of band behind this mindset, it brings in an us-them reality to the community. So when you go back to the first question about trust, has trust ever really been there? And then, we know how long it takes to get it and how long it takes to rebuild it.
Very good conversation. I think this is a good opportunity for us to take a break. It's close to 11 a.m., so we'll take a approximately 5-minute break, and we'll be back shortly. Okay, so we're back from our brief break, and I appreciate everyone who has stayed with us already. We are opening it up to anyone that has a question. Please make sure that you raise your hand. Please understand that you will have, if you want to do an audio question, you have 30 seconds to ask your question. Also, if you prefer not to do an audio question and you just want to put a question in the chat, we encourage you to do that as well. We also, we may have some questions via email. So if you're not understanding the technology, and trust me, I'm with you. I've been learning about technology a lot lately. But if you don't feel comfortable with doing the audio or the chat question, please email your question in to events@ncdps.gov. That's events with an S at ncdps.gov. Okay, and I'll wait and see from Mike if we have any questions, and we will go ahead and start the conversation again. And I'm going to start with Dr. Nation and ask her, what, from law enforcement, what do we need to do a better job or to connect with the community?
Okay, so I think one of the things we have law enforcement actually do not do very well is going in and asking the community about their expectations of law enforcement, okay? So I wrote about citizens' expectations of the police. When citizens have certain types of expectations and those expectations are not met, that's when they become dissatisfied, and that's when they start to develop negative attitudes towards the police. So it's always imperative to talk to the community, know what the community wants. So here in Winston-Salem, and we talk about, the provost mentioned transformative. And so we had when I got here, Chief Cunningham was here, then Chief Roundtree, and we did a lot of work. One of the big projects we had was from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, smart policing. And that's one of the things we did. We went into the community and we gave community surveys. We asked the community about their expectations, and those chiefs then implemented it across the department in this total programmatic change. And so that is what it will take, right? Because we think we know what the public wants, but different community needs different things, okay? And so we have to really have that conversation with the community, and it should be ongoing, it should be constant. It should not be something that we do once and then 10 years down the road we do that again. Another thing is around what type of training are we really implementing within the police department, okay? And so what we found with our smart policing project here in Winston-Salem is that we brought in people from, different areas, and the police officers were really receptive to that. Folks who used to be officers themselves. We did focus group with the police officers. We did focus groups with the citizen, and we look at that data and talk about, how we can police more smartly. And that is a tradition that has continued. And so, as I said, it's not coincidental that Chief Thompson outlined these great programs that they have with regards to not only community policing but problem-solving policing. Because one of the things we need to understand is that infrastructures and institutions are important. And so if we're talking about infrastructures and institutions, those are not police matters. And so the city and the larger community has to also come into play. So the stakeholders look different. And so we have to collect data and we have to talk to all these different people, okay? The police department needs help with how do we, if we're revitalizing a city, how is it that we're revitalizing the parts of the city that's already vibrant? What about the parts of the city that is socially disadvantaged and socially disorganized? What about those parts of the city? And that makes policing harder for police when we don't do that, okay? We look across this community and we see these food deserts, we see these recreational deserts, and then we wonder about juvenile crimes and criminal activities within those communities. We have to think about a holistic plan. That is how we get at the problem here.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Nations. I really appreciate that. I think just to kind of piggyback on what she's saying, in my world, I say that's social problems going unattended becomes criminal problems. So when social issues are not addressed over time, they become criminal issues. And so it's the criminal system that ends up picking up when the other systems break down or doesn't hold their end. And going back to again, what Pastor Sloan said earlier, and I really keyed in on the notion that in his community growing up, because he was in the projects, if you will, and I think that's what I heard you say, sir, that the expectation that the law enforcement services was going to be different or worse there than it was in other parts of the community that he was in. And so it begs the question that, first off, law enforcement attitudes in those communities, but also the attitudes could very well be a result of the poverty that exists in those communities that cause crime to occur. The education disparity, the unemployment disparities that go on in those communities. You know, I think about many of us, if you're familiar with Winston-Salem, we drive up and down a major thoroughfare, University Parkway, every day, not realizing what's going on to the east or west side of that road. And if any of us ever go to the Robert Wood Johnson's life expectancy website and you plug in an address in a zip code on one side of University Parkway, 27101 zip code, and then you go and you plug in an address on the other side of University Parkway, 27104 zip code, you will see that there's a 13.8, that's 14-year lower life expectancy in the 27101 zip code than it is in the 27104 zip code. And I think that goes directly to what Dr. Nation is speaking to on, we have all these problems that are going on and they are not being adequately addressed in certain areas of our communities, and they become criminal justice or criminal problems. And I think going back again to what she was saying is that it's going to take all of us. This is not just a law enforcement problem. Yes, law enforcement has a lot of work to do. We need reform, no doubt. And there are some agencies that do it and deliver the services with a great care, a whole lot better than others. And it is those agencies who should feel an obligation to reach out to those agencies that are struggling to do a better job and help be the mentor to those other agencies. And I'll tell you, I have taken on that responsibility, and I think other law enforcement leaders across our state have done the same, because we too have recognized that. But I think I just wanted to make sure we really highlighted and not glossed over the point that she's making here, and that is that what we're dealing with, and I'm talking George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all those incidents, they're not just criminal justice issues. When you get to the core of those issues, of those incidents, those interactions, you will see that they are a direct result of social problems going totally unaddressed, and they bubbling up, and what we see is an eruption off the criminal justice side. So thank you again for highlighting that.
I believe we do have a question from the public. Sergeant Baker.
We do have an online question coming from our online web forum. I'm now going to introduce Adrian Kennedy. Adrian, you're going to have 30 seconds to ask a question. Adrian, are you with us? Adrian, if you will, please make sure that your mic on your side is not muted. Okay, we'll come back to Adrian. That's the only online question on the web form we have at this time.
Okay. No other questions at this time? We'll try and come back to Adrian. Okay. All right. I think we need to talk about a topic that's not real pleasant. Sometimes it causes great stress when people talk about defunding the police. Anyone of you have any comments regarding people wanting to defund the police? Dr. Nation?
I'll jump in. It just depends what you mean by defunding the police. It's overall a bad idea, period, right? Because in our society, we do need social control agents. Defunding the police, some people have different connotations of what this means. Oh, we're going to take some money out of here, put it to this, that, so on and so forth. That's not defunding the police per se, right? But people are using this moniker of defunding the police. But the police plays an instrumental and important role in our society. And I don't see that, and I don't see that changing for the entire span of our civilization, because, as I said, we do need formal social control within the society. We have to think about how to better facilitate relationships between communities and police, right? Something like if you have a riot and, police they don't train every day for riots. And so there are going to be some missteps, right? But I think one of the fundamental issues here when people are talking about defunding the police, the people are upset because they feel like the police have no respect for certain communities. And the law enforcement treat certain communities in such a manner that is aggravating to them, okay? And I'll tell you that I have experienced this, right? And, I got stopped for no reason. And when I say no reason, I mean no reason. And so in that, and if I wasn't who I was or, how I spoke to the police, so on and so forth, but someone gets stopped like that for no reason, they're going to be aggravated and they're going to, interact with the police in a negative manner. But this idea around defunding the police, I don't think it's realistic. I think it's something folks talk about. That's not something I would embrace because I know the importance of having law enforcement, in the community. So that is not something that I could even imagine that would do. But I said we could use some of the funds for different things, right? More community partnerships, more engagement. Does a city with 5 officers or 10 officers need a SWAT team? These are some of the fundamental questions we need to ask. What does the programmatic and strategic activities of the police look like? Okay, so I just use a SWAT team just as an example. Like, how could we use that money in a better manner? Do we have to buy all these assault rifles or these military equipment that a lot of police departments are buying up? What could we use those funds to do? So I also think about issues around, how do SROs work in schools? Because some SROs just don't work in schools. It's not effective. And the message it gives to certain communities is what also impact the negative attitudes towards the police. So these are some of the issues we need to think about when if we're thinking about, how do we move resources around? How do we apply resources? What does the budget looks like? These are issues.
Mr. Herrera?
Yeah, same thing. I don't agree with defunding the police department. I think that's something very scary, very dangerous. I do believe we do need more money going towards mental health issues and dealing with mental health problems, which some of the calls the police department deals with. We also need more money going towards drug addiction and people with drug problems. But at the same time, you hear about the defunding and you hear that people are saying, well, we can have civilians respond to these calls. Unless you've been there and had to fight with somebody that's on PCP or some type of drug, you know, that can turn ugly very quickly. Domestic violence calls, yeah, it'd be nice to have somebody there that can intervene and calm them down and talk to them. But domestic violence calls in all these years, I think, has been, correct me if I'm wrong, but been the #1 killer for law enforcement officers. Domestic violence calls turn ugly very quickly. Mental health, when you're dealing with back in my day we called it EDP, emotionally disturbed person, but when you went to an EDP call, that can turn very violent quickly. So I cannot see how a civilian is going to deal with that, trying to respond, to a call like that, which is what a lot of people are talking about when they talk about defunding. So no, that is a very extreme thing that people are thinking about and trying to do. It could get very dangerous very quickly. So I do not agree with it. I do agree that money needs to be found and put into other programs. I think looking at things like SRO, do you really need it? I think that was a knee-jerk reaction to all the school shootings we were having, to have an armed personnel in the schools in case of anything like that, God forbid. But maybe we can hire a retired officer at half the cost. Look at things like that where you can cut down on some of the police costs. Like you say, the hard departments that I've seen are small departments, yet they have a huge SWAT team. Yeah, it might not be necessary. I am law enforcement. Hey, it's great to have all the toys and everything that you need, for an incident. But how often do these incidents happen? You have to look at the individual department and see if there's a necessity for it, or if it can be a combined thing among departments so that everybody's sharing it and have something, like you have the county, the sheriff's department, and then you have local police departments. Maybe you guys can combine and share it and cut down in costs like that, So yeah, those are things that you can look at, but not defunding the police department. No, I do not agree.
Something you said that I'd like to come back to, but I believe we have a question from the public.
Yes, we do. So Adrian was kind enough to write in. She's having technical difficulties with her microphone. This is a two-part question to any panelist who would like to answer it. Who determines how police departments choose a strong community policing model? So who would make the decision regarding what type of model they choose to have? And also, how can counties that show poor relationships among those within the county train their individual officers to help develop stronger relationships among those they serve?
I'll take that one.
All right, Chief.
So in terms of who, and I guess it could be different from one agency to the other, I'll speak to the Winston-Salem Police Department. As I mentioned earlier, back in 1989, then Chief George Sweat, the chief of the police department at that time, made the decision that it was in the best interest of the community and the agency to move from traditional policing to community-oriented policing. And over time, that has evolved. I would think that moving to that model, and again, I came to the Winston-Salem Police Department in 1994, so it's the only way I've ever learned how to deliver law enforcement services. It's the only thing I know. So I would think that the decision would be made by the agency head, but I also believe that there are other members of the department that should feel comfortable going to their police chief or their sheriff or their agency head and making that recommendation, and then seeking out agencies that they believe are doing that well. And then I need to admit that we can all do better, but agencies that are doing that well and seek the mentorship in making that happen within their own agency. In terms of how a sheriff's department or any other law enforcement agency could better have relationships with communities, I think first off, you got to have the want to. So as an agency, you have to want to have that relationship and be open to hearing what it is your agency is not delivering that your community needs. Not taking that personally, but trying to work through how to make that happen. And so, so it has to be deliberate, it has to be intentional. Again, I would recommend that you seek an agency that is doing some of the things that you want to do, but also, as Dr. Nation has said, reach out to your community to find out what it is they need and expect from their law enforcement agency, and then work in collaboration with the community to start making those things happen. For us, community policing is not a squad or a platoon or a group of people doing this work. It's our whole entire agency. It is the culture, it is the philosophy of our organization. So whether it is our communications operator who accepts that first 911 call, it's the police officer that responds, our forensic services team that goes out and processes the scene, our record specialist that's inputting that information into our record system, or the officer that's going to court to testify. From beginning to end, that is the philosophy and that's the expectation that I have and our community should also have of our law enforcement officers in delivering service. It is also important that law enforcement officers have policies that hold their agencies, their employees accountable for maintaining that philosophy. But again, I say that's the only way I've ever learned how to do law enforcement. So in our agency, it's like breathing for us.
Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. All right. So back to Mr. Herrera. You mentioned mental health. And it made me think about, are there policies or attention to specific things that need to be mandated by the state? Or do you think that's more of an agency decision? And I'll say, for instance, crisis intervention training. Is that something that should be mandated for every department? Or is that an individual agency decision?
Personally, crisis intervention training, I think it behooves every officer to have it. I only say it because as a hostage negotiator, which is the correct term now, is crisis intervention officer, but I was trained, now as a hostage negotiator, the only one that can train you is the FBI Academy. They're the ones certified throughout the country to do that. But there should be some type of crisis intervention training for regular officers to be able to better deal with mental health training. Yes, I think it would behoove every officer out there to have that training. It does. The training I got, it did teach me to have a better understanding and be, I think, made me a better officer and knowing how to deal with people and how to talk to people and how to listen better and then respond.
Dr. Nation?
Yeah, I think that is important, but I think what is more important is the police department having someone who is actually, that is their specialty. That's their area of focus. And this person can also be a civilian, because I think sometimes it's really unfair to ask our officers to deal with mental health situations that they have so they can be trained for crisis management. But mental health situation, you know, that's varied. And I think a professional, maybe a civilian professional employed by the agency or contracted with the agency would be a much more effective approach. When an officer gets that call, they know that there's this constituents that they can call to come to the scene and help them. I think that is, you know, a policy that each department should look into.
Do we have any questions from the public? Okay. All right. I think we need to talk about accountability and transparency. So I'm going to, Chief Deputy Joyner, if you will, what programs or opportunities do people have to build trust with your agency or to show accountability? How do you let the public know when you hold your officers or deputies accountable?
That's a good question, and it's a relevant question out here today. It's what a lot of people are demanding, a lot of people asking for, and as an agency, we try to be as transparent as we can. I can tell you, things that we run into is when we have an incident and we're demanding to be transparent, we're being held back by several different entities. There's state laws that says what we can and what we can't release. That was something that was frustrating to me as a new administrator, is when people would call and they would want to know the answers, and I would want to tell them. We would go through legal, and legal says, well, you're only allowed to give them this information. You're only allowed to share this with them. And so what we've done in the short time we've been here is we've took those laws and stripped them down as much as we could to where we have, if someone has something that they need to see from our agency, something that they need to get from our agency, that there's forms that they can sign that says this is what I need, and then we run that through legal, and we'll try to pull legally what we can to share. And then we have, if it involves a crime, then we have to go through what the DA's office will allow us or the SBI will allow us, because once we turn something over to the district attorney or to the SBI or outside entity, then it becomes their investigation, and then even though we're the keeper of the information, we're not at liberty to release it until that entity tells us it's okay to release it. And so we have opened up ourselves to public forums quarterly. We try to do it as often as we can so that we can get the questions, and sometimes we can slip transparency in there when we don't have lawyers and stuff in the room to stop us. Sometimes we say what we think the public needs to know and then take the heat from the attorneys. Lots of times when we get through with media releases, we know we're fixing to get 10 calls from different entities saying that you didn't need to say this, you need to do this. But the way you build public trust is to tell the public what they need to know when they need to know it. If you tell them 6-10 months later down the road, that does not seem transparent. That seems like that it's coming out after everybody knows what happened, and it makes the public think that we're being forced to put it out, but that's just when we're allowed to put it out. And so I think if we could maybe change some laws to free up in the Public Information Act to where we can let information out sooner, and maybe put some discretion on the agencies as to what we release, so that if we think it's something that's not going to hurt our investigation but help gain public trust, then let's let the public see it, so that they can have a little bit more trust in what we're doing, and know that it's not the agencies that are withholding the information. That we just know that we want to let it out, because we're the ones that has to take the scrutiny. We're the ones that has to take the hits from the public when you're saying you're not being transparent, and believe me, that's not a hit any of us wants to take. And so we would probably over transparent if it was up to us when when the attorneys get mad at us. But it's tough. I just want the public to know that there's a lot of times that we want to be transparent, or we want to let information out that we're not allowed to. It's not always the police department. We're the ones that respond, so we have all the camera footage, we have all the reports, but once we write them, they become basically they go in the hands of whoever's investigating that crime or prosecuting that crime, and they tell us, okay, this may sway a jurist, or this may hamper our investigation, and so that's something that you don't need to let out at this time, and that to us ties our hands.
Would you say that when the law was changed a few years ago, and it made it so if a public citizen wanted to get or wanted to view a dash cam video or body cam video, do you think that helped or hampered our efforts to be accountable, hold people accountable, and be transparent?
It definitely hampered, because there's now there's law saying that we're not allowed to let this out without a court order. And as you know, once you go to court, sometimes that goes on for months before it goes before a judge, and the judge decides, okay, this video can be released, or the second page of this report can be released. And during that time, law enforcement is the one that's taking the hit from the public that we're not being transparent. And if we could speed that process up, that would help. I think it would help build bridges between us and the community, so that, or if it was just, like I said, if it was a little easier for us to release the information.
Colonel or Chief, do you have expectations that you put on your agency, to certain time expectations to be able to get information out when there's a serious incident, a use of force or something like that with one of your officers?
So with our agency, it's important that we get the information out to the public as quickly as possible. As Chief Deputy Joyner mentioned, we have to follow the same laws that everyone else will have to follow. I think for our agency, me personally, and I've shared this time and time again internally with my staff, is we're going to be transparent as the law will allow us to be. First off, we're asking our community to trust us, right? And that's what community policing, relationship building is about. So that means you have to admit and be willing to admit when you're wrong, when you've made a mistake. And internally, I have said this over and over again to staff. If we make a mistake, if we're wrong, I'm going to be the first to say, we messed up on this one. We're going to learn from it. We're going to deal with the consequences, and then we're going to move on and grow from it as a result. Likewise, if we did it because something looks bad or is getting a lot of negative press, doesn't mean I'm going to come out and say, we messed up. We didn't. And understanding that certain parts of law enforcement just isn't pretty. We wear a bulletproof vest and carry a service weapon, and we call those tools of our trade. And whenever we have to use those things, I don't care how justified it is, it's never going to be pretty. And so understanding both sides. But when we do make a mistake, and I'm out there every day saying, trust us, I, as your chief, are going to make sure that the right thing is done. I'm not going to turn around and hide behind a law or a policy. You know, I'm going to come out and say, we've made a mistake, and as soon as we can release the video or whatever it is we can't show, we're going to release it. But like I said, at the same time, because I thoroughly believe that the majority of law enforcement here in Winston and across our country, the majority of the women and men that wear this uniform do so with pride and do so with the intent to make the communities that they serve better. It's those handful of people who have their own agendas, who go out and break laws, break policies, break the training that they've been delivered, that makes us all look bad in the profession, and that's extremely unfortunate. I personally understand the need, and as a citizen in the community, I want to know when something isn't right. Again, we're humans, and we make mistakes, and sometimes what we make is not a mistake. We've just been wrong. But I think it's important that we, again, have the courage to say that we've messed up or we've done something wrong when that is the case, but also be able to come out and say, I know this looks bad, I understand that, but I can assure you as your chief that we have followed the policies. Understanding too that just because we can do something doesn't always mean we should do those things.
And, Madam Moderator, I'll just add just a few more to, I agree with what the chief said. Leadership requires just that, leadership. I can't think of any situation where a member of our organization has been involved in an incident where my response can ever be, there is no comment. If we want to maintain the public's trust, we all take an oath of office. We receive our authority from the very public that we are trying to protect and to serve. no comment can never be a response. Working with our legal, there's always opportunities for us to be transparent. You know, we never want, as chiefs and as leaders of our organizations, we also have to be mindful of due process. Our officers, our state troopers, our deputies that are involved in these various situations, I'll say critical incidents, they have protections, they have a due process clause that we have to honor. And there is a balancing act. There's a State Personnel Act that we are responsible for and that we have to abide by. There's public records laws that we have to abide by. So there are things that we have to navigate and work through. But any of those things aren't insurmountable when you're trying to maintain the public's trust. But in all these set of circumstances, it starts with strong leaders holding their personnel accountable and being transparent. All of them can occur at the same time.
Is there a situation where you feel, any one of you, this is a question for any one of you, where it's appropriate for an outside body to come in and investigate an incident?
I think yes. I think there should be some level of accountability from the community to be in place to hear these types of things. And I will say this, one of the challenges that I believe that the community has, what I hear in the community is there's a lack of empathy. And I understand the laws and what has to happen, but when those types of things take place, and when we feel as if we're being shut out from hearing what's really going on, we feel as if you're protecting, those that we feel. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. We just get a snapshot of what took place. We didn't see the beginning and the ending. And I've been through the trust talks, and I've been through the process in the sense of, the screen that you guys have up, and I have to make a decision if I'm going to use a weapon, if I'm going to try to detain the process. So I understand that you have to make split-second decisions, but I really feel as if we're going to rebuild those relationships, that I think that there's going to have more empathy, is going to have to be more empathy from the legal and the Department of Security and Public Safety, in the sense of we've been taking like our voice and us hearing that. I don't feel that there's enough of that. So when we talk about transparency, there's a lack of confidence right now. And we can't cause this, but let's be honest, politically, there's a split down the middle of those that are for law and order, that I have issues with some of those tenets, historically speaking, and those that, are for the people. And we're making the world choose today law enforcement or humanity. We're making the people choose. And then every side has their own community that chooses to communicate that the way they choose to, whether it be through social media, through anger, frustration, whatever. But I think as a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen, we definitely need to look at those laws again. I mean, because in the realities, if I read through the reality better, and even the due process, most people don't understand what due process means. I mean, and when it comes to the legal matters, only attorneys understand dictum. I mean, nobody understands that stuff. And so when you're seeing some kind of crime that takes place, then I'm going to make a choice at that particular point. And let's be honest, at this particular point, the community does see it's an us versus them. Even in scenarios where we may march or may protest, and somebody, not the peaceful protesters, come and dismantle that. And who knows what side they're from, who knows whatever their thoughts or their actions were. Now all of a sudden, you're seen as the negative. You're still seen as the problem. And now things have to be deployed. SWAT has to be deployed. And we're sitting in our living rooms now, we're watching this day by day by day. And I'm not just talking about adults. These are kids having these conversations, saying, why are we being treated this way? And these are kids that have parents that are private school, non-private school, the reality, trying to understand, why do I have to have my parent talk to me about, when I'm driving as an African-American male, a totally different conversation. And so when we're talking about transparency, we're talking about the confidence, it's lost. It is smoldered somewhere beneath wherever. And I'll be honest with you, at this particular point, yes, I have an African-American son, and yes, I am an African-American male, but at the same, my African-American sisters are now being and so when we talk about transparency, It feels to me, when you said that they're being protected. And that's just a small bunch of people that's doing that. I feel as if, and I get it that there's things that have to be done, we have to investigate, I get that. But then I don't hear the empathy come from, these press conferences. Because to me, it seems very political, it seems very rote, it seems very process driven. And I get it is a process, I get it, I respect it all. However, and I even told Chief Katrina this at the break, that to see her at a protest and to speak about, her special needs son, to me, I totally had a different, I loved her before then because she's a rock star. But for her to be seen in that environment, not trying to send those people home, not trying to make it seem as if these people are negative in the sense of what they're doing by exercising their public rights as citizens to speak on whatever they want to speak on, but to see her get a mic and without uniform and to speak to say, hey, these issues are impacting me as well. I personally don't think, and I'll be done, I personally don't think that George Floyd, Breonna, all of those are the issue. I think they're just evidence of what's been happening for decades, which the same thing with Emmett Till. Emmett Till was just evidence of the hate amongst the cultures in our nation. And let's not be honest, we live in the South. And I totally understand what that means. And I'm taught from a very young person up what that means. And that's why we still have the yes sirs and the no ma'ams, and I get that. But in reality, I think it's an issue of a lack of empathy when it comes to public safety. And not all of them, but there is a lack of empathy when those situations take place.
And I just want to say this real quick because Pastor Sloan brought up Emmett Till, and that's something I learned about very young in life. I want to make sure that all of the listening audience, if you don't know what he's talking about when he mentions Emmett Till, please Google it, look it up, and understand what happens in that case, because that's very, very important to today. Thank you.
We're getting close to the end of our time. I believe, do we have another question, Mike?
Yes, we do. This question is from Sally McLean, and her question is, what measures are taken to weed out officers that use excessive force?
First of all, with regard to transparency, and Pastor, I receive your feedback. This makes my organization better. I receive it wholeheartedly and will take it back under advisement and to try to be better. To answer the caller's question, and with regard to transparency and accountability, when we as state troopers are involved in a critical incident, and for an example, I'll say a shooting incident, we don't investigate ourselves. We coordinate with the district attorney's office, and we request them to request the SBI in partnership for them to come in and conduct an investigation of our state troopers that were involved in the incident. And so as the caller asked a question about use of force, for our agency, anytime our members are involved in a use of force, they have to write a report. It's then reviewed by a supervisor, and then after that supervisor reviews it, it's submitted to Raleigh, and it goes before Use of Force Review Board. On this review board, there are personnel assigned from our training academy who is looking at deficiencies as it relates to training. Our legal is seated on this board, and they're looking at all aspects, use of force. There's also representation from training and also from our internal affairs. And after they review use of forces, they make recommendations. Some of those recommendations include referring it to internal affairs. Internal affairs will then coordinate with my office to see whether or not we need to refer it to district attorney's office for criminal prosecution or criminal review. So, we have very high standards within my organization through these other law enforcement agencies that are throughout. From the ones that I partnership with, I know that they have them as well, but we can't police ourselves and maintain the public's trust. So having outside entities to come in and to look at how it is we do what it is that we do is crucial.
We have just a few minutes left. If you will, if you just if there's something that you want to say that you haven't said already during the forum, if we just want to take approximately 30 seconds, if you just had some last words. Mr. Herrera.
Yeah, I said from the beginning, I'm grassroots. Mentoring, that's a huge thing to me, and I like to see law enforcement get more involved in the community as far as mentoring, because I think the youth, we've been saying it for years, the youth are our future, but we're not doing anything to change the way that they look at us and look at life in general. Mentoring is a big thing. Get involved more. I think you said a lot of your officers get involved in the community and sit on boards and civic associations, and I think that's a great thing. I got involved, even though I was in the gang unit in New York, I got involved with Strong Youth, and this kid, we grew up together. We took different paths in life. He became a gang member, and I was out on the street and I would see him, I'd get on top of him, he'd curse me out, and then it took a friend of his getting killed for him to change his view on life, and he went back to school, and now he has a master's in social work, and he asked me to come back and work and be on the board of directors for his youth organization. And being in the gang unit, I did see a lot of kids that, hey, yeah, some of them, they need to go to jail. There's no changing them, and they're bad, and they need to be put away. But then you had others that you can tell were being influenced by the streets, they didn't have family, or their family was out working, and the only family they had with the other kids that would get them involved in bad things. So they just needed somebody to mentor them and put them on the right path. Same thing when I came here. I'm retired, I got a good pension, I can relax and travel and just sit back and take it easy. But I live here. Like you said, this is my community. I live here, I hate to see bad things happening, and that's why I get involved. And that's what I want to see, is just more mentoring, more involvement. I take out my kids with Hope, helping out people eat. We go out almost every weekend. I drive the truck for them, and I take them out, and we go to communities that my kids are like, whoa, people live like this, and this is going on here, and there's this gang violence. Yeah, we have a better life now because I worked and set up a nice path in life for myself, and you guys are living in this environment now, but this is what I grew up in, and I don't want them to forget that.
Anyone else? We have just a couple more minutes.
Yes, just a quick, I think, as a task force move forward, they really have to address the occupational culture, okay? The occupational culture is something that needs to be, a huge part of what law enforcement in North Carolina, across the country, is working at, looking at. And as we said, the agencies that are doing it the way we think is important, those should be the mentoring agencies. And also including voices. Like one of my ex-students is here as one of the state patrol agents. So that's important to get minorities, women, embed them in law enforcement as well.
Another quick comment? Okay. All right, Mr. Secretary, if you want to close us out.
Thank you, Pamela. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. This has been a great exchange. I'd like to also thank our viewers who have joined us and participated as well. I described this at the beginning of the journey that we're on. This is just but one of those steps on those journeys. There is much work to do. There are lots of, but the good thing is that there are a lot of energy moving us forward. That's not just law enforcement, that's communities that are impacted by everything that has occurred. There are theories out there. Is it just a few bad apples? Or is the whole barrel rotten? Perhaps there's a combination of both. Maybe there's some bad apples. Maybe there are things about the barrel of the culture of law enforcement. Maybe it's the environment by which that barrel is placed, because lack of investment in mental health, lack of financial opportunities, lack of education opportunities. These things are so much broader than the police, but we're here taking accountability and responsibility to heart, and I thank you all. Appreciate it.
If anyone has burning questions that did not get answered today, please email us at events@ncdps.gov. That's events@ncdps.gov. Thank you very much.